good morning, or whatever time of day you're watching this, and welcome to the CreditCast, the most reliable podcast out there for all things credit, as long as you don't count any of the other ones. And today, in honor of our first episode of CreditCast, we will be talking about all things credit from the history to present day, as well as anything information-wise that you may need to know. So first of all, let's start off with the history of credit cards. All the way back to around the 1800s, where the first relative use of credit, this isn't talking about credit cards, but the use of credit, in which merchants would use credit coins and charge plates to extend credit to local farmers and ranchers during westward expansion. And this gave people the ability to forego paying their bills until they harvested their crops or sold their cattle. Now, while this is technically not a credit card, this is basically what credit cards would become, foregoing payments and then making them at a later date, which is what this was. Fast forward about a century or so into the 1900s, when the first early use of credit was taken a step further, and when a select number of department stores and oil companies began issuing their own proprietary cards, which became the precursor to modern-day store cards. But these cards were designed less for the convenience that we take credit cards for today, and they were more just to improve a store's business and service. Now, we're still in the 1900s here, but the first renditions of what would become the modern-day credit cards had already been created by the founding fathers of credit cards. And these cards, however, would soon be followed by banks, who would soon launch their own consumer cards, and these cards would become known as bank cards, which would allow cardholders to carry their normal balance forward for a monthly finance charge rather than having to sell their bill in full each month. And this is more commonly today known as revolving credit, which I'm sure if you own a credit card, you are familiar with that. And it was around the 1970s, so we're still in the 1900s, but this is definitely later 1900s, when the popularity of credit cards is really taken off. But like anything that becomes popular, there are definitely some dangers involved. So a lot of consumer complaints had begun to increase during this fast-growing industry. A lot of businesses were taking advantage of what credit cards could do, and as a result, a number of acts were created between 1970 to 1977 regulating unethical business practices regarding credit cards, including issues such as abusive billing, debt collection, which is still a problem today. Applicant discrimination was especially apparent in African Americans and women of the time who were being denied credit cards just solely on the basis of their gender or race, and the unfair use of credit report data. But in the following years, credit card advancements and changes continued and varied from business to business, and banks and card issuers were now allowed to issue multiple card brands, and the passage of the Card Act, Credit Accountability Responsibility Disclosure Act in 2009 gave consumers greater transparency and reduced high interest rates and fees imposed by card issuers. And the RFID chip in cards allowed for touchless ID verification between a person's credit card and a merchant's RFID scanner. And this has even been improved upon with Europay's creation of EMV computer chip cards, which provided even more security with ID verification. And credit cards would continue to advance in their design and functionality up into this very day, where now we are especially seeing a shift towards online and mobile payment. I don't think credit cards will go away anytime soon, but with the shift towards online and mobile banking, we definitely will see a slight change throughout the years. And those last things I mentioned were mainly just to summarize that as the years have passed, more and more advancements have been made to credit cards at increasing frequency. Now, I touched on the dangers of credit cards a little earlier with like businesses doing unethical things with them, but I want to talk about like dangers in like use of credit cards and how your information can be stolen. So, a potentially large danger of using credit cards is only making the minimum payment. So this is essentially when you rack up a credit card bill and then you pay the minimum payment of what that would be at the end of the month. And the problem with paying only the minimum payment is your debts will continue to accrue since you're not paying off enough to cancel out the debts you already putting on that card. So if you're continuing making the minimum payment, you're never really going to have the option to pay that off, and you will likely be stuck with that debt for almost all of your life, if not all of it. And the next issue I want to talk about with credit cards is also like being irresponsible with only paying the minimum payment. And this is overspending, which is when you spend more on a credit card than what you actually have in your account. And this a lot of times comes from the false conception that you have more money than you actually have with the credit card. Because compared to cash in your wallet, you automatically know how much money you have and whether or not you can buy something. But since you pay for things later with credit cards, you don't have that same grasp of whether or not you can afford it until sometimes it's too late. So I think the best way to avoid overspending, especially for new credit card holders, is avoid buying on impulse and buying an excess amount of things that you want rather than need, because a lot of times the temptation to just buy a cheap thing there or something here is definitely tempting, but when you do it a lot, that's when you become a victim of overspending. Well, another danger I want to talk about, and this is more not necessarily the fault of the person holding the card, but become a victim to credit card theft, as well as online or physical forms of theft, in which thieves can use a variety of ways to steal information from card holders and use that information to spend that person's money on their account. Now, if you're smart, you will be able to stop that person, like freeze your credit card before they can make any charges to it. But you gotta be ahead of the game and make sure that you're paying attention to suspicious charges made to your account, or make sure that you know if you've gone somewhere where you're prone to having your credit card information stolen, that you verify with your company that hasn't happened. Now, this is very common on the internet with a number of fake emails which are used to scam cardholders for their personal information. And while cash cannot be stolen virtually, it can be stolen from a credit card, and if people are not smart with who they give their information to, they can be subject to credit card theft as well. Now, I've talked about some dangers and history of credit cards, but I think now it's time to get into some more interesting facts for necessarily people who might not have known this, or it would be helpful to know when using your credit card. Now, first thing I want to talk about are interest rates, and fixed interest rates on a credit card can be changed with only 15 days notice from the credit card provider. And what this means is that it is important for cardholders to be prepared for changes in rates so they can still be able to make minimum payments each month. It's also important that credit card providers follow this guideline, since it is meant to protect customers from frequent changes in interest rates. So, with any credit card, when you sign on, you're going to be expected to pay your interest rates, but you also have to be prepared for sudden changes in your interest rates depending on how things go around in the world, especially with the economy. And as we see right now, how easily it can change quickly. You always have to be ready for changes in things like your fees and interest rates. So just keep on your toes with that thing, so you'll pay a higher interest rate depending on that 15-day period that the provider gives you. Next, I want to talk about a study shows that each American household receives approximately 6 credit card offers each month. And the reason this is important is because it shows that credit cards companies are eager to gain more business, but it also tells the consumer that they need to be smart and shop around for the card that best works for them rather than picking any card offer they receive in the mail. Now, credit card providers are just like any business where they rely on getting more people to sign on to them so they can make more money off of them. So they're going to do what any other business does and send you things in the mail in order to get you to sign on to them. So it's just important that you shop around, like with anything else, for the best deal you can get from a credit card, and not always fall victim to just picking a credit card that you get in the mail. And I touched on minimum payments earlier, but what I want to talk about now are the reason minimum payments are so low. The reason that is the case is because it allows for the consumer to carry more debt. And this is kind of sometimes what banks want and credit card providers, because when we're making the minimum payments, that's why it's a bad idea, because card providers rely on interest rates to make back their money. so they know that they can make more money by charging more interest on the debt accrued by a customer. If you're not careful, you can become trapped in debt very quickly. Next, credit card companies earned $55.2 billion in fees and $90.1 billion in interest in 2006. Now, this basically just illustrates how much money is being made off of interest and fees by card companies, and these numbers only get high as years pass. This was 14 years ago now, so it's not hard to imagine how high that number is today. And these companies, they rely on interest and fees to make their money back, and despise when customers pay back their debts in full because they know they won't be able to make as much money from them. Now, just because companies not be happy by the fact that you're paying in full on time, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that they know that they would be able to make more money off of you if you don't do that. So never be deterred by paying in full. Just make sure that you're not being subject to too much debt at any one time. Next, this is more fun fact to know, is that the first digit of your credit card tells you which industry issued the card. Now, this is normally why someone has multiple cards with the same number as the starting number. And just to quickly run through what each one means. So numbers 1 and 2 indicate an airline card. Numbers 3 is a travel and entertainment card. 4 and 5 are for banking institutions. 6 is for merchandising and banking. 7 is for gas cards. 8 is for telecommunications. And 9 is for assignments by national standard bodies. You may ask what's the purpose of having designated starting numbers. Well, this allows for better organization when using cards. It also allows for businesses to indicate what industry issued a specific card. This next fact or piece of information is mainly just to illustrate just how common credit card use is in the modern era. And there are 10,000 worldwide credit card transactions made every second, according to the American Bankers Association. And this is just an indication of how popular credit cards are in the modern era. It also shows just how often they are used in everyday purchases. With such a large number of transactions being made every second, it's easy to understand how card issuing companies can make so much money from card sales, interest, and additional fees. The task of businesses and banks being able to keep track of so many transactions is also very crucial since they are dealing with so many people's money. And a lot of times we think of using credit cards for the larger purchases in life, but like when you hear a fact like that, that just tells you that it's replacing a lot of the things that used to be used to pay things like checks and stuff. Checks are just not used as much as they are today, and a lot of this is because it's being replaced by credit cards and just how convenient they are to use. So, 10,000 worldwide credit card transactions every second is just incredible, and it's not hard to see just how much money credit card companies can make off the sale of those cards and the interest and fees accrued by those cards. And speaking of interest and fees, nearly half of Americans have outstanding credit card debt, according to the U.S. Federal Reserve. And around 60% of those people also report having the same amount of debt or more than they had the previous year. This is an indication of just how crucial it is to avoid accruing debt on one's credit card. It also shows that once someone starts building up debt, it is unlikely they will be able to pay it off anytime soon, and it's fair to surmise they will continue to grow in debt. That's just all the more reason, if over half of Americans are currently having outstanding debt, and by the fact that 60% or more have the same amount or more than the previous year, just shows that it doesn't go away anytime soon. And you got to make sure that you don't let that debt linger for too long, because people can die with debt, and sometimes that can mean that their children and descendants or even grandchildren may have to be dealing with that debt as well. This one is comfort to know for credit card theft, is that federal law states that your maximum liability for unauthorized credit card use is $50 per card, and it's important that the government is being more focused on cracking down on credit card theft, but it's also important that we as cardholders stay on top of suspicious purchases made on our cards. This is because if you report a card lost or stolen before any charges accrue, you're not liable to pay any of the debt charged to the card after. So it's good to know that you would only have to pay $50 if unauthorized charges are made. But I mean, it would be nice or to even save that $50 if you could stay on top of it and stop that credit card from being charged at all and saving $50 right there. Now we've talked about some facts. Let's talk about why it would be nice to have a credit card, because there seems like to be some very unappealing things so far. Let's talk about a very main one and a very helpful one. It's very useful to have a credit card when you're in an emergency situation. And this might not even be like a physical emergency, but let's say that you're at the store and you really need like water, or you really need to buy something like clothes for your family, and you just don't have the cash on you right now. It would be really helpful if you could use a credit card to buy that and then focus on paying it off later, so you don't have to worry about providing for your family as much right now. And this also goes for physical things, of course, as well. If you are in an accident and you need to pay your hospital bill, and then you can pay it off at a later time. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have no money with you, it's very beneficial to be able to use a credit card in order to purchase or pay for anything now and pay off that purchase at a later time. It's also nice to have a credit card when you are seeking to improve your credit rating, but that also means that you must be able to make payments on time as well. So building your credit history is important, as it allows you to have more options for credit use in the future. It also helps you to avoid higher interest rates from card providers. It's very important that with a credit card comes obviously some really high responsibility, but for being more responsible with the card, it gives you the ability to show it through your credit score, and having a higher credit score obviously means you'll get more opportunities in the future for more perks on your card, or maybe nicer cards in the future. So just keep that in mind. Having a credit card can be very beneficial in that sense. They're also very useful for making purchases in any situation, not just emergencies, especially on the internet, because with the increasing use of online transactions, having a credit card to be conveniently make purchases on the internet is very helpful, and sometimes even required in the modern world. I mean, just for think of all the things you pay for on the internet now, where it be subscriptions on the internet. Even when school, I know the school I go to, when your lunch account, your lunch account is charged to your account as well. There's just so many different things where your credit card is used that it's just very beneficial to have one, Like, if you just think of all the different times you use it, I mean, that's just so beneficial, and that's why it's really nice to have one, because of how convenient it makes your life. So we touched on a danger of credit cards being theft earlier, so let's get into more of the specifics of how your card can be stolen. I just talked about online credit, how it makes it very convenient, but what it can also do is make it very dangerous. An online form of identity theft, and this is probably one of the most common ones out there, is known as phishing, which is when scammers use emails posing as a real organization, agency, or company. And the purpose of doing this is to prompt the reader into entering their personal information, such as their address, their credit card number, their bank account number. And what this means is that they can use that information to then pose as you and then make charges on your account. So it's just very important that you look out for suspicious emails on there, because if you haven't ordered something on Amazon and you get emails asking to confirm your shipment, pretty obvious that that is not from actually Amazon or Microsoft or anything like that. So if you just make sure that you look out for dangerous or oddly seeming emails. That's just the best way to put it, because it's very common, and a lot of times the consequences can be very real if you don't pay attention to them. Now this is the next form of identity theft I want to talk about is real world, and this is known as skimming. And what this is when identity thieves install a device onto an ATM or a credit card reader, which can read your credit card information as well as your ATM or card PIN, and You can avoid being a victim of skimming by paying attention to ATM machines, just like paying attention to emails, and avoiding ones that appear to be tampered with. And just by avoiding one, I mean, that's nice that you avoid being subject to that, but you should also make sure that you notify the business or owner of that ATM so you can prevent others from using that machine as well, because you wouldn't want to be subject to identity theft just as much as someone else wouldn't. So it's very important that you report that, because you can't really do that with the online scam emails, because those are non-stop and there's so many people who do that. But you can actively stop someone from tampering with an ATM machine if you report it. Now, I have some additional information I would share for you guys to close out, and this is also very helpful for people beginning with credit cards. So it's important to know that the best cards with the most useful benefits are normally not for those getting their first credit card, as those are normally geared towards those with a high or excellent credit rating. So those starting off will likely get a card that is intended for those with limited to no credit history. And it's important for those beginning not to be discouraged by this and continue to improve their credit ratings in order to be eligible for higher end cards in the future. I mean, if you're starting out for a credit card, you likely don't need a card with that many benefits at all, since you're really not going to be making that many charges on it at the beginning anyways. So don't be discouraged by the fact that you might not be able to get the best cards when you're starting out, but you should be encouraged to improve your credit rating so you can get better cards in the future. This is very important, and this might be even more common sense, is you can see rates and fees of a credit card before applying, and it's even required of credit card issuers by federal law to disclose this information. But you can find this information in what is called Schumer box, and essentially what this is a table that can be found on a credit card's online application page. And what this information includes is annual fees, APR, foreign transaction fees, and late fees, which are all very important information for getting a credit card. So you should definitely make sure you view this information before signing for a new card, so you will not be surprised by these fees in the future while already in possession of that card. Because if you find out that you can't pay some of those fees, then you're in a very unfortunate situation. Next, we're going to talk about credit cards, and they expire due to wear and tear on the card's magnetic strip. And the magnetic strip on a card is normally only good for about 3 to 4 years before it needs to be replaced. But it's up to you to make sure that you replace that card, so you're not just continually holding on to it and wondering why it's not scanning it when you're trying to make purchases. So while it's unavoidable for a credit card's magnetic strip to need replacement, it's also important for card owners to take care of their credit cards, because additional wear can mean needing a replacement card much more frequently. And also, taking care of your credit card means not losing it, and also not sharing information to people who may not be trustworthy with it. This next fact is about the location of many credit card companies, and a lot of them, and most of them actually, are all located in states with high or no cap on interest rates. And this is very interesting to see, actually, but it also makes sense. You can definitely see how it makes sense, because it's likely the credit card companies will be able to get more customers at that location while also making more money on interest. And it's very interesting to also see the various ways credit card companies use to increase their efficiency and profits. A lot of times, since we use credit cards so much at businesses, we forget that the credit card companies are businesses themselves. And like any business, they use a variety of ways to make money, and including locating their companies in those locations. So it's not really, I mean, sometimes you can see it as like shady, but like it's really just how businesses make money these days. They have to do what they can, and a credit card company is just like any other business. And the final piece of information for the day is that a gas pump will authorize a purchase automatically for $50. So if a person has less than $50 in their account, the gas pump will reject the card. And this is just another example of a great modern day invention. because it's very interesting to see how technology can be used to prevent people from overspending on their credit cards. And it's also important for cardholders. Like, it's always the cardholder's responsibility in a lot of these situations to be aware of how much money they have in their accounts in order to avoid overspending. I mean, it's very embarrassing whether you're at a gas station or a restaurant, and then either the waitress or whoever, or the person in the checkout line at the supermarket, if they tell you that your card's declined, it's just not a very appealing situation. So you just have to make sure you're on top of your card payments, that you're smart with how you use your credit card, that you take care of it, that you're not giving information to untrusting people, and that you're just very responsible overall with your card. Because I mean, it's cheesy, but like, with the great power in a credit card, I mean, it's a really great responsibility that you have to take. And I mean, there was a lot of history behind how credit cards came to be, and there was a lot of work put into them. But with all that work, you still got to use them the right ways. And I just want to make sure everyone's out there is very educated on this subject, and that they can use the information they learned today for using their credit cards better in the future, and using the information you learned just to know just how important credit cards are today in the modern world of spending and transactions. So, for today's CreditCast episode, I thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.